All right, welcome back, everyone. So, a big update. Trump has finally made an official announcement on what he's going to be doing. At least to an extent, we know what he's going to be doing. He's announced a new office of the former president. I'll be explaining this in just a bit. Also, going a few other updates on what's happening in the U.S. right now. Hopefully, get to some other stories around the world also. Yeah, thanks for being here, y'all. Thank you. I have your comments down below here, so if you see me looking down, just reading them. Yeah, John Jacoby, good to see you. Yeah, good to see you all here. Thank you. Real quick, too, folks, just want to say thank you all for the support. I mentioned before, we have gotten demonetized by YouTube, and really, you folks have really helped us out a lot. And so genuinely, from me and the whole team, thank you. It really does help us and really helps ensure that we can keep going, regardless of what they try to do to us with censorship. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into the questions. As always, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to get to them. And I'm going to be going over a few different stories first. Get to them in just a bit. All right, so first off here, this is a tweet that went out with the official statement, and you may see it's been making rounds around the internet already. It says here, the office of Donald J. Trump, January 25th, 2021. It says, statement from the office of the former president, Palm Beach County, Florida. Today, the 45th president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, formally opened the office of the former president. The office will be responsible for managing President Trump's correspondence, public statements, appearances, and official activities to advance the interests of the United States and to carry on the agenda of the Trump administration through advocacy, organizing, and public activism. It says President Trump will always and forever be a champion for the American people. And this is very, very interesting. Now, you might remember 2016, Trump got elected, and what happened was, Obama actually came out, and Obama made himself kind of this office to contest Trump, this whole war room he set up near the White House. There were a lot of stories about that because they kind of faded away into the background. And you, of course, saw individuals like John Kerry, other former Obama officials, traveling behind Trump officials as they traveled abroad. There was a lot of debate over that violated, for example, the Hatch Act, because there was concern they may be undermining U.S. policy abroad. Now, nothing was ever done about that. Nobody was ever charged, of course. But it's interesting now to see that Trump is doing something kind of similar. And he's not calling it, now it's interesting, he's calling it the office of the former president. And he's essentially going to be continuing pushing the agenda, it says, of the Trump administration, but instead of through the official presidential role, through the role that a citizen can play, through advocacy, organizing, and public activism. Essentially, what Trump is doing here is he's making what looks like, although it's not in title, basically, essentially his office of a government in exile. If he's not calling it that. But it's interesting that he is invoking his presidential title, office of the former president, to again continue pushing for what he was pushing for before. Now, it's unlikely this will violate the Hatch Act, because very likely this is going to be U.S. centric. It's unlikely he's going to travel with this. And this is interesting as well because it's a move he's made to basically fight back on the narrative front and also on advocacy, again, organizing and public activism. Essentially, he's turning the tables on what the left usually did. You might remember, for example, Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, and basically the idea of community organizing. That was one of the big things Obama was part of, Chicago community organizers. Individuals who essentially use public organizing, often you only see it with far left groups doing real heavy organizing like this, using that type of organizing to push for different agendas and to get the grassroots moving and to subvert political processes through the grassroots. It seems Trump is now doing this. And it's very interesting because you usually don't see conservatives doing stuff like this. The closest they may have are some nonprofits and maybe the churches. Although the churches, because of different tax regulations, even don't really play that role typically. So this will be very interesting to watch going forward. We don't yet know what type of organizing he's going to be doing. We don't know what type of advocacy he's going to be doing. We also don't really know what type of platform he's going to use to communicate, given that he's deplatformed just about everywhere. Now, I had speculated before that it's possible he may even start his own social media. There's been talk of him starting his own media, for example, as well. We have not yet heard any updates on that. There was also talk of the Patriot Party. One of them was formed. The Trump team has disavowed that. I'll be explaining that in just a bit. Now, let's move on to a couple more stories, then we'll go into some questions. Now, next up here, as I mentioned, this is Epoch Times. It says, Trump team disavows newly formed MAGA Patriot Party. It says, former President Donald Trump's campaign team is disavowing any affiliation with a newly formed political committee called the MAGA Patriot Party. And this is a statement from Jason Miller, who told the Epoch Times on January 25th in a text message. He said, quote, "We are not supportive of this effort, have nothing to do with it, and only know about it through public reporting." Now, I won't go too deep into this. Basically, Donald J. Trump for president, right, in a miscellaneous report filed with the Federal Elections Commission, said it wanted to disavow the activities of a committee named Patriot Party. And the MAGA Patriot Party National Committee filed a notice of organization with the commission earlier on January 25th, today, while the filing claimed that Trump's team was linked to the new committee. Trump's team said it did not authorize the filing of a form claiming it was a participant in joint fundraising activities, hasn't entered into any joint fundraising agreement with the new committee, and has no knowledge of the Patriot Party's activities. Now, this technically does not mean that Trump isn't going to form a Patriot Party. Just to make this clear, this is not saying for sure he's not going to form his own Patriot Party or his own political party. All this means is that this organization, the MAGA Patriot Party National Committee, is technically unofficial on the Trump side. Trump is saying that they have nothing to do with this particular party. And so it does not mean he may not start his own. We'll have to see. Now, there's also talk, I've seen other talk that he may still do something. Again, there's also been talk, for example, about him even running in 2022 instead of 2024. But now we see this new statement again, the office of the former president. And it seems to be that this is going to be his main focus. Now, a few things to think about with this is that Trump, of course, has kids, Trump Jr., Melania Trump, his wife, of course. There's also a chance, too, we could see them get involved in different things. No updates on that yet. And it's also not clear whether they're going to be involved directly with this new initiative he has, the office of the former president, essentially working as Trump's new battleground office on the narrative and activism front. So we'll have to see how this goes, because this is some new territory for all of us. Now, next story up here. There's been a bit of a shift now taking place within the whole, say, Trump diaspora. This whole movement is taking on a new life of its own right now. This is a news story. MyPillow creator Mike Lindell could run for governor of Minnesota and claims he has Trump's endorsement to do so. Mike Lindell, the inventor of MyPillow, said he might run for governor of Minnesota, adding that he was promised an endorsement by former President Donald Trump. It says the former president had told him that he would back his bid for Minnesota's governor. Lindell told the Associated Press on January 23rd. And Lindell said Trump told him, quote, "Mike, if you did it, I would get behind you." And he said, of course, as well, of course it would help, meaning Trump's endorsement of him. He said, why wouldn't it help? The guy was the best president in history. Now, he added a caveat to Axios in saying he is currently trying to prove his claim about alleged voter fraud during the November 3rd election and won't make a decision until that fight is finished. So in other words, Mike Lindell is going to continue fighting on the vote fraud front before he considers running for governor, but that is possible. Another story here along the same lines. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, again, former Trump spokeswoman, announced a run for Arkansas governor. It says here, another story. It says former Trump White House press secretary Sarah Sanders said on January 25th, today, that she's formally launched her 2022 campaign for Arkansas governor. And she said in her announcement video, quote, "America is great because we are free. But today our freedom and the rule of law are under attack." And she added, "I was the first White House press secretary to require Secret Service protection because of a credible violent threat against me. We've seen violence in our streets, at a congressional baseball practice, and at our Capitol. This is not who we are as Americans. To remain free, we must have law and order and resolve our differences peacefully. The radical left solution is to impose government control and censorship from the top down. But their socialism and cancel culture will not heal America. It will only further divide and destroy us." And she continues stating, "Everything we love about America is at stake. With the radical left now in control of Washington, your governor is your last line of defense." And this is actually something we're seeing with Texas right now, where, again, the Texas governor and Texas attorney general are pushing back against some of Biden's policies. She continues, "In fact, your governor must be on the front line. So today I announce my candidacy for governor of Arkansas and ask for your prayers and support." Now, real quick, the gubernatorial race is wide open because Governor Asa Hutchinson, a Republican, is unable to run next year due to term limits. And so again, we have Mike Lindell, Sarah Sanders, possibly running for governor in 2 different states. Trump again forming this new office of the former president. And it seems to be that the Trump team, essentially, at least the people who are left of the real supporters around him, are kind of forming their own united front, I guess you could call it, to play on the CCP's or communist word for it, to form a new united front to kind of run like counter subversion, essentially, working from the grassroots to infiltrate the institutions and change the society from that direction. Again, this is very interesting because we've seen politics, right? Trump is president and so on. We see some nonprofits, typically though the grassroots activism front and the subversive front, are controlled exclusively by the very far left. And Trump is now getting involved on that level. Now, let's go a bit deeper into what's happening right now. Now, real quick update on some of what's happening with the legal. Actually, let me go into a couple questions first, then I'll get into some of the legal issues taking place and some of the different attacks on the Trump teams. Am I saying Arkansas wrong? Arkansas. See, I give you all the news and you teach me how to speak English properly. Arkansas. Oh, I love it. All right. Thank you all. All right. I'll go over a few questions, then we'll jump into some of the different updates for tonight. First of all, let's see. This is from SWHY. You said, why is no one asking why Trump has not invoked the executive order based on the Ratcliffe report? It does seem to be the case, again, the 2018 executive order Trump had on election interference from foreign countries. Again, Ratcliffe had said China, Russia, Iran interfered in our elections. He had a report saying China interfered and detailed some of that. Now, that was not acted upon by Trump. There are some allegations now that Trump had actually tried to do something, and actually I'm going to get into in just a bit. The Department of Justice is going to probe if department officials sought to overturn the election results. The Biden administration is now launching investigations into Trump, essentially, his team and his administration, for trying to overturn the election based on these things. Now, I've heard different allegations on what happened behind the scenes. Some allegations I've seen suggest that Trump may have been a lame duck president. In other words, he was surrounded by people who would not carry out his orders towards the end. And so had he even wanted to do something, it's unlikely the people around him would have done so. And at the same time, too, we did see Trump, and it's not clear if that was the case, but we did see Trump towards his last couple weeks in office firing people in key positions, right? Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and so on, around those key positions that you would think he would invoke something through. Now, of course, we never saw anything come to light, and it's not really clear what happened. I have some contacts who've only told me some very vague details on it. essentially that something had happened basically January 5th-ish. They were very vague about it. I'm not sure what the details were. It's not really clear why Trump did not do something, because it does seem to be the case based on a lot of reporting coming out now that he had wanted to. But again, I'll keep you all updated as I get more information on that. This is from Missy Vance. He said, what happens if the fraud is finally proven? Will Trump be reinstated? New election? Everyone talks like it's all a done deal. Biden will stay in regardless. I mean, I don't think we have a precedent for it. And so it's hard to say what would happen. It's hard to say what would happen unless there were criminal prosecutions and people went to jail for it, essentially. Meaning that the Justice Department would have to step in, or, I know you guys don't like hearing his name, but Durham, unless Durham stepped in with his new special counsel and powers of a prosecutor and actually did something with that. Now, of course, everyone kind of lost hope in Durham by this point, I think, but he does have that special counsel position, and he's kind of running silent right now. So who knows what he's up to. Now, it is possible as well that if the lawsuits that had been filed before before things were finalized, some of those lawsuits, if they were to go through, could have an impact. But it seems to be the case that the people who filed them, including the Trump team, including the We the People teams, they don't seem to be pushing so hard on their lawsuits right now. So it's really unclear what's going to happen. We could see, for example, as well, local states taking action, though. For example, we see Arizona doing investigations. There are some updates on this. We see different states doing investigations, and if it is proven in one state, very likely this will have a domino effect where people in other states will demand similar investigations. Now, will this overturn the elections? Personally, I don't know. I don't think we don't have a precedent for it, and so who knows how it could unfold. Unless, of course, there was evidence of criminal wrongdoing and something went through with that. So we'll have to see. This is from the one and only Pinky. Good to see you here still. He said, Joshua Philipp, I think Trump had to leave office because, I'm sorry, the question got cut off. I don't see your full question. See if I can get the full question on that. Next question here. This is from Culture Yabo. You said, Josh, is it realistic to expect a fair election in 2024? Will the Democrats not again just use Dominion machines and infuse fake ballots at will? Well, this is going to be one of the big crises I think we're going to face as a country as we have new elections, which is half the country, essentially. A lot of people, like 80% of Republicans, they've lost faith in the integrity of our election systems. Now, given that situation, you would expect the Democrats, currently in power through the new administration, having a supermajority, be interested in trying to renew faith in the integrity of our systems. It does not seem currently that they're pushing for that. Actually, it seems like they're doing the opposite. They're encouraging, for example, nationwide mail-in ballots. They're also encouraging chipping away at even current systems we have in place to ensure integrity of the elections. They're looking right now to weaken election integrity, right? Voter access, or whatever narrative they want to use for it. And so it's going the opposite way. Now, the Trump team, y'all cracking me up. Look at y'all teaching me how to speak proper English. All right, anyways. Back on this, right? The Trump team, of course, was pushing for people to continue to vote, for example, in Georgia, regardless of the concerns over the integrity of our election systems. And people were saying essentially that, right, being black-pilled and hopeless, as you could call it, doesn't really do any good. People need to still get out and vote. People still need to try to make a difference. Of course, it's hard to say how that will go, given the way things are. But it is interesting now that we have Trump working on the grassroots advocacy and activist front, again, through his new office of the former president. And this could actually have a big impact. This could actually play a very big role. As I mentioned briefly, essentially what Trump is doing is he established a grassroots subversive organization to essentially act as a glorified government in exile, but he's not calling it that. He's calling it former president, to use his powers as a private citizen now, to use the access available to private citizens to launch his own movements. And actually, this will be very interesting to watch as it goes forward. And again, he is interested in overturning again, right? He is interested in overturning again some of the House seats, some of the Senate seats when it comes to, again, 2022 coming up and so on. We'll have to see how that goes. Arkansas. All right. All right, folks. I'll do one more question, then we'll go deeper into the stories for the night. This is from Lily Beals. He says, is it true that subscribing to Epoch Times will help Crossroads also? Honest Annie, what flavor ice cream does Trump like? Yes, subscribing to the Epoch Times does help Crossroads. Crossroads is a channel of the Epoch Times. Pretty much, even if we're demonetized, we can still get by because, again, we're part of the Epoch Times. Of course, making a profit and being able to function properly is something we hope to achieve as well as a official channel of the Epoch Times. But yes, subscribing to the Epoch Times is one of the more solid ways to support us, and it's one that cannot be censored. And again, as I've mentioned before, YouTube has completely demonetized Crossroads. And again, as well, thank you all for your ongoing support. I mentioned we started a donor box page, and really, you folks have really helped us quite a bit, and I really appreciate it. All right, let's go over some more stories for the night. Now, next up, I'm going to go into some of what's happening. There's kind of a new front right now attacking Trump supporters, Trump himself, and others within the former Trump camp in politics. First off here, this is Epoch Times again. Department of Justice watchdog to probe if department officials sought to alter election results. It says here, the Justice Department's watchdog will investigate whether any department officials tried to improperly influence the results of the 2020 presidential election. It says Inspector General Michael Horowitz said in a statement on January 25th that the investigation will look into allegations concerning the conduct of current and former Justice Department officials, but won't extend to other government officials. Now, Horowitz said, quote, the DOJ Office of the Inspector General is initiating an investigation into whether any former or current DOJ official engaged in an improper attempt to have DOJ seek to alter the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. And this is a bit ridiculous, of course, because when Trump was president, that was a normal legal route of, say, investigating whether there was wrongdoing in the election. And of course, there was significant evidence that was the case. Now, so in other words, they're carrying out investigations into people who were carrying out investigations based on Trump's stated concerns and based on the legal challenges and legal concerns brought to different states and to the Supreme Court over the anomalies in the elections, right? This is what's happening right now with this. And so the Biden administration is essentially launching a glorified purge in some different parts of the government of people, right? Of people who were supportive of Trump and his policies and of his concerns through the office of the president when he was still president. This does seem to be the case that they're using this at the very least to go after individuals who were supportive of Trump in kind of launching their own internal purge based on ideology, similar to what we saw them do with the military, the National Guard, and what we saw Biden do as well with the Secret Service. This does seem to be the case again, that it is a pattern, and this is only the beginning of this as well. This demand for ideological alignment, right? Now, I'll go over a few more stories on what's happening right now. Daily Caller reported this. Virginia rule allowing late ballots missing postmark was illegal. Court rules. This is actually a big update in terms of what happened during the 2020 elections. In other words, the rule that was made allowing late ballots missing postmark has now been deemed illegal, meaning that illegal activity had taken place during the 2020 election, according to a Virginia court. I'll go a bit into this. It says the Virginia Board of Elections ruled allowing officials to count ballots that arrived without a postmark up to 3 days after the election was illegal, a state judge ruled. Virginia Circuit Court Judge William Eldridge ruled the state's late mail-in ballot law violated state statute and permanently banned the law in future Virginia elections, the Public Interest Legal Foundation announced Monday. PILF, that legal foundation, sued the state's Board of Elections in October on behalf of Thomas Reed, a Frederick County, Virginia election official. And this is according to the president of that legal foundation. Stated, quote, "This is a big win for the rule of law. This consent decree gives Mr. Reed everything he requested, a permanent ban on accepting ballots without postmarks after Election Day, and is a loss for the Virginia bureaucrats who said ballots could come in without these protections." Now, what happened here, deemed illegal. Will anyone be charged for that illegal act? We don't see any updates on that. And also, this does not seem to be impacting the 2020 elections, meaning that this is going forward, that they cannot do this going forward, not going backward, of course, unless Biden administration or someone changes election laws from the top down. There are some pushes again from the Democrats to essentially change election laws. Going further into this, this is again Giuliani now. It says Dominion Voting Systems files lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani. Now, going into this, Dominion Voting System announced on January 25th that it's filing a lawsuit against former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who filed lawsuits and held public hearings on behalf of former President Donald Trump to overturn the November 3rd election results due to allegations of fraud. This is according to the lawsuit now, which is explaining a $1.3 billion lawsuit against Giuliani. It says, quote, "Rudy Giuliani actively propagated disinformation to purposely mislead voters because Giuliani and others incessantly repeated the false claims about my company on a range of media platforms. Some of our own family and friends are among the Americans who were duped." It says Dominion had already filed a lawsuit against lawyer Cindy Powell, who filed third-party suits on behalf of Trump. It says Giuliani continues to make demonstrably false claims, and we intend to hold him and others who spread disinformation to account. Although no amount of money will repair the damage done, we must pursue justice to expose how disinformation was maliciously created and purposefully spread to deceive the American people. Now, in a statement to the Epoch Times, Giuliani said that, quote, "The amount being asked for is, quite obviously, intended to frighten people of faint heart." And Giuliani continued, saying that he will look into countersuing Dominion. He said this, quote, "It is another act of intimidation by the hate-filled left wing to wipe out and censor the exercise of free speech, as well as the ability of lawyers to defend their clients vigorously." Now, again, this is part of the broader back and forth of what's happening with the fallout of the 2020 elections. More on this. Brandon Straka with the walkaway movement is now facing charges for his involvement in the January 6th, protests at the Capitol building. Interestingly, it does not appear that he actually entered the Capitol building, but he's being charged regardless. This is from 6 News, one of the articles. It says here, FBI Omaha field office said Monday that agents had arrested an Omaha man on federal warrant related to the January 6th protest at the Capitol building. According to the FBI release, Brandon Straka is in federal custody in Omaha and will face the following charges. Brandon Straka, again, one of the speakers at that event, one of the organizer of the walkaway movement, and now facing federal charges for his involvement in the January 6th protest. It says this: he's being charged with impeding law enforcement officer during civil disorder, knowingly entering and remaining on restricted grounds without lawful authority, and or engaging in disorderly conduct within proximity to a restricted building to impede official functions, and for engaging in disorderly conduct with intent to disturb a hearing before Congress. Now, Brandon Straka is currently again in custody. He was arrested. He's being held in Omaha. It says, according to the criminal complaint filed with the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., Straka was able to get within a few feet of the Capitol entrance on January 6th In other words, he did not enter it. There's no apparent evidence he actually entered the Capitol building. He was outside the entrance, and he's being charged with this. He's being charged for going within a few feet of the entrance and then yelling to a crowd to take a Capitol police officer's protective shield. He said, "Take the shield, take it, take it." It says Brandon Strzok is being held at Douglas County Corrections and is expected to appear in federal court on Tuesday, officials said. Now, I went over some of what's being stated about him, and essentially they're making it seem, they even mentioned that he was part of the walkaway movement and is a former liberal and turned Trump supporter. And it's very bizarre to actually see that in a criminal complaint, because it's making it appear that that is part of a criminal act in some ways. Very bizarre what's happening to him, again, because he did not actually enter the building. And he's being charged with crimes suggesting, again, it says knowingly entering and remaining on restricted grounds. Of course, some of the stuff engaging in disorderly conduct, if he did tell people to take the shield from an officer, that might stand. But again, this is a concerning development because, well, again, we'll have to see what he ends up getting charged with in the end. But it's a concerning development because one of our constitutional rights is the freedom of assembly. If Americans lose freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, both of which are under assault right now, what does that mean for our Constitution? What does that mean as well for our rights as citizens? Now, ironically with this, we have the Democrats looking to invoke the 14th Amendment against Trump, suggesting that, again, if they can't impeach him, and it's saying that it does seem to be the case that they're kind of losing hope in the impeachment, they now want to invoke the 14th Amendment, suggesting that Trump had tried launching an insurrection and using the 14th Amendment based on that to go after Trump. But also part of the 14th Amendment, interestingly, goes against government officials who deny the American people their basic rights. And you could argue, based on the 14th Amendment, purely my analysis, that officials who are undermining the basic rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of belief, and say even Second Amendment rights could also be held under that as well. Now, not to say anything will happen with it, given we have a new administration that I could not see them ever bringing a case on that. But we'll have to see what happens with this again. I'll go over a few more updates with this. Now, Senator Josh Hawley, another update here. Senator Josh Hawley is a Republican. He's calling for an ethics probe into Democrats who filed a complaint against him. Basically, ethics probe for individuals calling him out for basically serving his role in government. Now, on Monday, he called for the Senate Ethics Committee to probe the Democrats who filed a complaint against him and Senator Ted Cruz over their objections to Electoral College votes. Now, the Democrats in their complaint last week said the senators may have engaged in improper conduct, quote unquote, by filing the objections, even though their actions are allowed under the Constitution. Democrats filed their objections in 2017 and 2005, among other years. Democrats acknowledged Cruz and Hawley had the right to object to votes, but alleged that Republicans who objected contributed to the breach of the Capitol building, writing that the senators, quote, amplified claims of election fraud and had resulted in threats of violence against state and local officials around the country. Now, on this as well, who remembers back in 2016 and 2017 when the tables were turned and Trump was going into office and the Democrats were encouraging electors to basically overturn the elections? How many remember that happened? Democrats said, hashtag not my president. You had mass protests on the street and ongoing incidents like this for the past 4 years, which resulted actually in many deaths and large-scale violence, fires, and looting. Would that be the same thing? It does, on this particular case, again, challenging the Electoral College vote. Yes, it was. It was the same thing. They did the same thing back in 2016, 2017. And of course, this is also part of the normal actions that elected officials are able to carry out. They have the constitutional right to question, again, whether the Electoral College votes are proper, especially when you have dueling electors like we did during this last election. Again, you see basically constitutional rights being stomped on right now. And so Halley is again calling for an ethics probe into these Democrats who are doing this. Now, a couple more updates. Interesting update with Trump. The Supreme Court, this is another story. The Supreme Court tosses out lawsuits filed against Trump while he was president. The Supreme Court has thrown out 2 long-shot anti-corruption lawsuits against former President Donald Trump on the grounds that they were moot because he left office and became a private citizen. Now, the High Court itself, right, overturned these different charges against Trump. Interestingly, on grounds that they're moot because he left office and became a private citizen. Now, interestingly, with this, they're trying to now impeach Trump based on, again, based on that he questioned the election results, and they're blaming him for what happened on January 6th. Again, although the evidence doesn't line up because people were breaching the Capitol building while Trump was still giving his speech. In other words, the statement they're accusing him of making, which they say caused that, he had not even stated by the time people had breached the building, meaning that his statement on January 6th had nothing to do with the initial breach. But it's interesting here that the Supreme Court now has ruled that some of the other charges they brought against Trump, anti-corruption lawsuits, are moot. They cannot be carried out because, again, he's now a private citizen, no longer president of the United States. And again, that was one of the big issues that's been brought up around their attempts to impeach Trump. Now, again, the House has voted to impeach Trump. The trial has to go through the Senate. And of course, in terms of the Constitution, you cannot impeach a private citizen. Trump no longer being in office, they cannot legally do it technically, according to the Constitution. Democrats are pushing forward to do it anyway. But now we see the Supreme Court basically standing by what the Constitution says on this. Now, I'll go over a few more updates just to go over a bit of what's happening on kind of the onslaught against Trump and his supporters right now. Now, this is another story, update with Parler. Real quick. The drink tonight is old school, homemade kombucha with actually a bit of ginseng. It's quite nice. Now, this is related to Parler now. It says here, House Oversight Republicans say FBI's Capitol riot probe into Parler should include Facebook and Twitter. And this is interesting because you might remember that, again, Parler, this social media site that was canceled and removed from the internet by Apple, Google, again, gone after by different public officials right now, is being charged and is being investigated right now for whether they were involved with inciting in any way the riots on January 6th or the breach of the Capitol building. And again, you might remember I spoke on this show with the CEO of Parler, and he noted that, well, people, of course, were making comments on his platform like that, but they were making the same types of comments on Facebook and Twitter. And so if he's being singled out on this and Facebook and Twitter are not, and he's been canceled by Amazon, and Facebook and Twitter and Twitter is not, because Twitter is also on the Amazon Web Service that they were using. What does this mean in terms of, say, bias, and what does this mean in terms of the integrity of our legal system? Now, again, he's being investigated as well because his wife was from the former Soviet Union. She had escaped, and they're investigating now whether that connection means that Russia was involved with Parler. Again, the Russia investigation now extending to private citizens. I'll go into a bit of this. It says Republicans on the House Oversight Committee criticized calls by the panel's chairwoman for an FBI investigation into the role the social media platform Parler may have played in the January 6th Capitol riot as, quote, blatantly and overtly partisan, arguing that for any such probe to be fair, it should also include Facebook and Twitter. And again, as we noted before, most of the actual organizing took place on Facebook. And you might remember as well, this Mr. Sullivan, one of the individuals who was arrested and who had affiliations with both Black Lives Matter and with Antifa, and who was involved with those riots as well. In fact, on the front lines of it, including right where Ashley Babbitt was shot, had made statements on some other platforms, chat platforms, I think Discord, I believe, stating his intention to infiltrate the event, the protests, and his intention to basically cause problems within it. Now, is Discord being investigated for that type of organizing? Is Facebook being investigated for that type of organizing? Currently, they are not. But Republicans say that if Democrats are calling for investigations into Parler based on that claim, then, well, Facebook and Twitter should be investigated as well, in order to be fair, based on the fact that they were doing the same thing, essentially. And quickly on that as well, that is also why you have legal protections under Section 230. Now, remember, Trump was trying to overturn Section 230 legal protections for Facebook and Twitter. Basically, what this does, which Parler is held to as well, is it means that being that these are platforms, not publishers, that they have so many users and people publish all kinds of stuff that they cannot be held legally liable for what people publish on their platforms. That is the content of Section 230 protections. That is the nature of Section 230 protections. And what you're seeing happening now is that essentially these platforms that enjoy Section 230 platforms have begun acting Section 230 as platforms while playing the role of publishers, are going after other social media sites and individuals, again, right, who are basically acting within their legal rights of not being able to moderate content because they have that protection, of not doing the types of things that these platforms are doing, violating, ironically, the very nature of Section 230 protections. In other words, they're being targeted and gone after for doing what is legal under their protections, while these other platforms are holding them accountable, and even some government officials are criticizing them because they're not doing something that goes against the nature of their legal protections. It is a very bizarre flipping upside down of the very nature of what that protection means under Section 230. Again, publisher or platform. If they're platforms, which these are, and they're enjoying legal protections because of that, it means they're not able to moderate content and have legal protection because of that. And again, now we see the tossing out of the very nature of that legal protection, essentially in these accusations and in these alleged investigations again. All right. Going a bit further into this. Actually, I'll get into what's happening with the impeachment in just a bit. Let me go over a few questions. Let's see. This is from Robin Murray. You say, Joshua, good evening, and thank you. Thank you as well. You said, does it even matter anymore regards to elections? Do you think they will follow through again with always being a Democratic win? Joshua, good evening. Oh, sorry. Does it matter with elections anymore? Personally, I would say don't. I would say do not abandon the election system. What we saw, for example, in Virginia, as we just discussed, is their local board of elections have determined, again with this lawsuit, they've determined that the way that the mail-in ballot, the change to the mail-in ballots when it comes to signatures, that change was illegal. And going forward, they cannot do that. You're going to see, again, these state legislatures in different states that do actually have technically the legal authority when it comes to determining how elections are done, very likely stepping up. And a lot of these states, you actually have more Republican you have more Republican, electors. And so it's very likely, again, that these individuals will be able to change things. We'll have to see how this goes again. You folks still making fun of me about the Arkansas. You're cracking me up. All right, back on this though. Yeah, personally, again, it does seem to be the case that going forward, a lot of the things that were done that went around, violated the Constitution essentially in terms of governors changing the election laws, bypassing again the state legislature, which is technically illegal, right? That they're by bypassing that, technically they went against the Constitution. Again, it was a strange situation which they took advantage of as much as they possibly could, which was we were in a pandemic and they were able to enact laws based on that, which were technically unconstitutional under normal circumstances. And so Going forward, they're not going to have that smoke screen, very likely. Going forward, that will not be possible for them to do. And so going forward, again, I do think, yes, you should still vote. You should not give up on our election system. Very likely the Trump new grassroots movement of Trump, again, having his office of the former president and working on these types of issues, and as well trying to get even, again, Sanders and possibly Mike Lindell in the positions of governors in the United States, that from the grassroots level, you're going to see Trump try to basically change the country again. It'll be interesting to watch, but again, please, I would recommend do not lose faith in the election system. Yes, you should still vote. I think when you give up and give in and become hopeless and black-pilled essentially, it doesn't serve anybody, including you, any good. I would say don't lose hope, don't lose faith, and continue to enjoy your rights as a citizen, because it's when you stop enjoying those rights and acting on those rights that you lose those rights. All right, let's go next question here. This is from Jacob Van Dyke. He said, "Do you think the office of Trump's of the office of the former president is a mockery of Biden's office of the president-elect they came up with when the election was being litigated?" Yeah, so y'all might remember that, again, before things were finalized, the media and Biden himself basically declared that he was president-elect before he technically was. And he was speaking on official grounds as such, and basically overriding Trump claiming presidential powers, essentially, or at least the authority of that, when that was not the case. And media, including social media, including Facebook and Twitter, were putting alerts on everyone's feeds stating this was the case. And if you questioned it, you could be censored. Trump is, I don't know if he's doing that intentionally, making a mockery of it. Personally, it's interesting that Trump is invoking the name of the office of president. He's calling it the office of the former president. So he's invoking the presidential title in his new office that he's formed, this new essentially grassroots movement he is forming. But through that, again, as I mentioned, he's technically playing what in most countries you would call the role of a government in exile, basically. And it's quite interesting. It's going to be very interesting to watch at the very least. All right, let's see here. This is from Cal Hens John. He said, if Trump gets impeached in the upper house, can he still run for president? If he gets impeached in the Senate, from what I understand, no, he will not be able to run for president in the future. It does seem to be the case, again, though, that Democrats seem to be doubting whether they have the legal ability or the votes necessary to impeach him. Again, based on the Constitution, they can't technically do it. And even going forward, Trump may be able, he's a private citizen now. Remember, Trump is a private citizen now. Trump could technically file a lawsuit if he wanted to against them for violating the Constitution if they choose to move forward with this. Trump now has the protections of a private citizen, right? He's no longer president. He's the office of the former president. All right. We'll see how it goes, right? But again, there are signs again that the Democrats are losing faith a little bit in their ability to impeach him, because now they're talking about invoking the 14th Amendment, basically alleging that because, according to their allegations, he incited an insurrection, they're calling it, that based on that, under the 14th Amendment, he should be barred from running again as president. And so they're trying different methods. We'll have to see what goes through with that. Again, he's a private citizen now, and if they wanted to take that route, he could go after them legally even. And if it's not constitutional, we'll have to see how that unfolds. All right, I'll do two more questions, and then I'll jump into some more news updates. This is from Sharon Crawford Larger. You said, "Are there funds to help peaceful protesters that go unlawfully arrested?" Not that I know of currently. The Democrats had funds like that, legal funds for example, Antifa, people arrested for Antifa riots or BLM riots. We don't see anything like that for conservatives currently, at least not that I'm aware of. Maybe Trump will do something with that based on his new office of a former president working on the grassroots. Again, we'll have to see what he actually does with it. This from Bruce Brindles. He said, "Thanks, Joshua. Any news on the Arizona audit?" Not currently, but if there are updates, I will let you all know. All right, I'll go over a few more news updates now. Now, this is from, again, Epoch Times with the impeachment trial. So Justice Roberts is not going to be overseeing the Trump impeachment. It says here, Senator Leahy will preside over Trump's impeachment trial. Said Senator Patrick Leahy, he's a Democrat again, President pro tempore of the Senate, will preside over next month's impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, Leahy said on January 25th. Now, Leahy is 80 years old. Both parties traditionally choose their eldest member to serve in the pro tempore role, which is essentially a backup for the president of the Senate whenever they gain a majority in the body. Now, he said in a statement, quote, "The president pro tempore has historically presided over Senate impeachment trials of non-presidents," and added, "When presiding over an impeachment trial, the president pro tempore takes an additional special oath to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws. It is an oath that I take extraordinarily seriously." We won't go over this much more. Now, the U.S. Constitution states that the Supreme Court's Chief Justice shall preside when the President of the United States is tried in an impeachment trial. But once Trump left office last week, that threw Chief Justice Roberts' role into question. Again, because technically it's not constitutional what they're doing right now. Right. I'll explain this in a bit. Roberts had presided over the first impeachment trial. So again, let me explain this, right? Under the Constitution, the Supreme Court's Chief Justice, Roberts, right, shall preside when the President of the United States is tried in an impeachment trial. The Constitution says that is how it has to be done. Technically as well, the Constitution does not, well, it can be argued, of course, based on how you interpret it, but the Constitution, what they're doing right now is unconstitutional because on two different fronts, right? Unconstitutional on two different fronts. You cannot impeach someone who's no longer president. He's a private citizen. That is unconstitutional. And also, the Supreme Court justice is supposed to oversee it because, again, that's part of the Constitution, which they're not doing now because, again, it goes against the Constitution. And so they're bypassing it and making their own way of doing this. Again, we'll have to see what happens with this because Trump could file lawsuits if he wanted to after all this is said and done. As a private citizen, because they're violating the Constitution, arguably on a few different fronts by doing this, by moving forward with this. How did I say another thing wrong? Mark Schaffer Leahy. You see, folks, very slowly I'm learning to speak proper English. Thanks to all of your support. All right. All right, let me go deeper into this. All right. Go deeper into the news. Again, this is now it says growing number of Republican senators oppose holding Trump impeachment trial. Now, this is interesting to see right now because you do right now have a lot of Republicans saying that they may actually go along with the impeachment. Now, there's 27 Republicans saying that they don't agree with holding a trial. Democrats, again, need a 2/3 majority in order to impeach Trump. Now, very quickly on this, Democrats must convince at least 17 senators, that means, to vote with them to convict the former president. And what's interesting to see now is that different officials, Republicans who voted in the House to impeach Trump, because Democrats had some of them on their side as well with that, some of these Republicans are now being censored because of that. In other words, they're facing criticism in their own local states for doing so. Yeah. And so, again, Republicans seem to be backing off. They seem to be backing off of that whole move right now. And we'll have to see whether Democrats are even able to get the votes they need to impeach Trump, even if they find a legal route to again, hold these trials and do so. But even if they do impeach Trump, again, now he's playing the grassroots role. Trump is like the new Saul Alinsky right now, which is very interesting to watch. Again, for those of you who missed the very beginning of this episode, again, Trump has now formed an office of the former president, he's calling it, to work on advocacy, activism, and possibly giving speeches and events across the country. It's going to be very interesting to see how he does this, right? He could be, for example, holding Trump rallies like he was throughout his entire term as president, and basically at the same time running, right? Running again kind of a grassroots movement to change the country from the bottom up rather than from the top down. This is what you saw individuals like Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, do, and individuals like Barack Obama, who was a community organizer, and others, community organizers. Trump is actually playing the role of a community organizer on this, and he's even calling it that. Regardless if they impeach him, regardless if he can't run for president, Trump has found a way to do what he was doing before from the bottom up rather than from the top down. And it's a very interesting move, one which I did not personally see coming. Very interesting to watch going forward again. Now, a bit more on what's happening. Real quick, 13,000 National Guard members currently stationed in Washington, D.C. They're going to be keeping the National Guard in place in Washington, D.C. through the impeachment trials going through next month at least. We'll have to see whether they keep them in place afterwards. Now, I was in Washington, D.C. Honestly, the National Guard looked at ease and rather bored. They did not seem to be on edge. They didn't even have magazines in their rifles. They didn't look particularly concerned, but again, it's being used in the media narratives that, you know, there's threat of insurrection and Democrats are afraid for their lives and so on. And so they need to keep them in place to make sure that, you know, they're not attacked by the angry Republicans. They're going to keep them in place again for at least another month. Now, let's see. This is from Hiker a question is from Hiker AZ67. Josh, you said, Josh, are you CCP? Where were you born? I am not CCP. I would be the worst CCP member in existence, given they don't like me very much. I was born in San Diego, California, for those of you interested, actually. And yeah, San Diego gets a bad rap. California gets a bad rap for a lot of people, mainly because of San Francisco and Los Angeles. San Diego is actually like it's a military town. It's very nice, and actually there's a Republican governor there. It's very different from the rest of the state. Some of you asking, Joshua, would you interview President Donald Trump? I'd consider it if he asked, certainly, especially given his new role that he's playing. I think it'd be very interesting. Greg Carson, you asked, as former president, does he still have the protection of the Secret Service? I'm pretty sure he does. I think all former presidents do enjoy the protection of the Secret Service, especially if they still have threats against them, which Trump, I would say, has pretty serious threats against him. Trump, of course, being fairly wealthy, though, could also have his own security detail. And, you know, private security for people like Trump, you would have your own private security anyway. So it's not really clear whether he'd have that. This is from Sparky Hill. He said, Josh, what will happen when DOJ, Department of Justice, goes after Trump as a civilian for subversion? They could try to. But, you know, the thing with subversion is it's overt. You know, the reason why the U.S. never did anything against Saul Alinsky, never did anything about some of the different communist movements in the U.S., of course, McCarthy tried going after some of them, and, you know, McCarthyism is now like a witch hunt kind of term. It's very hard to go after people engaged in quote unquote subversion, because technically it is using legal means. Even when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, for example, organizations like the United Front, other organizations like, for example, the Committee of 100, who you know, do advocacy work on, you know, for interests of the CCP, you know, on U.S. soil. You can't really say a lot of what they do is illegal, because a lot of what they do doesn't actually violate U.S. law or foreign law for that matter. With the exception, again, is if they're acting as foreign agents of the Chinese Communist Party, which is what the Trump administration was doing with their charges, right? Saying that these different branches of it, they were designating them as foreign missions of the Chinese Communist Party, or going after them in other ways, but not, kicking them out of the country or anything like that. It's actually very hard to go after people for subversion because U.S. law technically allows for these types of things. Activism, community support, community activism, grassroots activism. Really, our political system is actually based on stuff like this. The forming of political parties, the forming of nonprofits, the grassroots actions to influence politics. We are not a totalitarian communist state, right? We're a system of government based on elections and based on parties and people voting for who they choose to vote for and promoting the people they choose to vote for. All of this is what our system is based upon, right? And so, again, they really couldn't go after him with this unless they try to find something actually illegal in the U.S. or if they changed laws on what is illegal or illegal, which, because of the way the U.S. is organized, again, we have 50 states, each of which has their own laws and their own system of government, and you have the federal government on top of that. You would have a lot of local states even possibly push back against moves like that, which is actually an interesting note going forward. A lot of conservatives especially are concerned right now that they may be targeted just for the sake of their political affiliation. And there are some investigations into the alleged domestic terror threat and what that actually would entail. Now, again, it is concerning again that the Biden administration does seem to be going after conservatives and also making very vague statements over who they're targeting with these things. But based on the way the U.S. is organized, again, 50 states with their own laws, some of which are Republican, run by Republicans, it's unlikely that would actually do much because states could fight back against that. States could push back against that. Private citizens could file lawsuits against that. And we have systems in place to prevent things from going too far with things like that. The federal government is not an absolute power in the United States, unlike in other countries that fell to communism, where if the head office, the office of the king, was subverted, they had absolute power over the whole country. It is not the case in the United States. So again, we'll have to see how this goes going forward. This is from S&S Woodgate. Sorry. This is from S&S Woodgate. He said, "What do you think about what's happening with China and Taiwan? Do you think the U.S. will get involved at some point?" Actually, it's interesting. The Biden administration is saying now that they're going to stand by, for example, Japan, and very likely, I don't think they've stated Taiwan, but Japan, when it comes to opposing the Chinese Communist Party's claims over the South China Sea and East China Sea. The Biden administration, Biden himself actually came out and condemned the CCP's persecution of the Muslim Uyghurs as a genocide. It does seem to be the case that he's going to keep at least the verbal side of this in place. As I mentioned before, though, we also need to see what he does in terms of action. Just giving talk, making statements is one thing, taking action is another. Biden is also keeping, to some degree, it seems, a Made in America policy, although we'll have to see how that goes, because when it comes to what he's doing with oil right now, he is already, through elimination of some oil policies, basically eliminated a lot of oil jobs in the U.S., which means we have to import it from countries like Saudi Arabia again. And so even though they do have this Made in America policy, even though they're pushing for that, already we do see some signs that they're moving away from parts of that. We'll have to see how far it goes. And also, the Chinese Communist Party, China right now, has overtaken the U.S. as the leader in foreign direct investment, meaning that a lot of people on Wall Street still pouring money into the CCP, it does seem. And if you were to ask me again, one of the big issues we have isn't just business ties to China, it's Wall Street, it's the banking industry ties to China, and they will undermine, to a large extent, political policy on China, and then out of their own financial interest begin lobbying U.S. politicians based on their own financial interest. And again, some of these people have a lot of influence. Now, this is from Juan Ramirez. He said, "When YouTube removes you completely, what platform will you be moving to?" We're working on some stuff. Stand by. We have some stuff in the works. He said, once YouTube confirms demonetization of your channel, it will be time to leave them for good. We'll have to see. Yeah. Stay updated. We'll have some updates on this. Again, as I mentioned before, YouTube has completely demonetized Crossroads and I think 7 other channels of Epoch Times and our sister media, NTD. And we can contest that next month. I'll keep you all updated on what happens with that. In the meantime, as I mentioned before, if you do want to support Crossroads, we have a donor box account. You can find it linked in the description below. That's donorbox.org/Crossroads. You can also subscribe to the Epoch Times. It also helps us. All right, folks, it's getting quite late, so I'll call it a night. Again, always enjoy doing these lives with you. It's always nice hanging out with y'all. You're slowly teaching me how to speak proper English. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a two-way street, right? I give you the news, you help me improve my pronunciations. All right, folks, I appreciate all of you. Always enjoy doing these, of course. And again, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has been quite the week, not just for our nation, but for the show as well. Now, as I mentioned in a recent episode, we found out the same day as the inauguration that YouTube has completely demonetized us. Now, honestly, it was expected, given the current environment of censorship, but it's also quite the blow to us financially, at least for the time being. It's a difficult time for not just us, but for the nation as a whole. In Washington, 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark. News reports said that the National Guard would be leaving, but even by noon, we still saw them stationed on the streets. And I wondered whether this really will be the new norm for the United States, and whether the nation has reached a stage where every national event going forward will have security like this. Now, it's not just the past few days that have been hard for the country, but the last year especially. We've seen panic around the CCP virus, job losses, an economic nosedive that hit small businesses the hardest. And on top of this, we've seen riots sweep across the country that pitted citizens against the police. We've witnessed a political climate where the people of this country are being held to 2 different sets of laws. And we saw a difficult election where many serious questions were left unanswered. People are losing faith in the integrity of our systems of justice, in our systems of government, and even in our fellow countrymen. Now, I was reflecting on all this as I walked through Washington. It's been hard for me to watch this country, which I love so much, facing so much turmoil and division. And it's difficult to watch our rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief being targeted for attacks. It's hard to watch big businesses and the big corporate media working hand in hand with big government in these attacks. Now, it was while I was thinking about this that a man recognized me on the streets. He greeted me and thanked me for doing this show. I've always enjoyed meeting you all, but it was especially so this time. It reminded me how important independent media is during chaotic times like these. Now, I've always held that truth has the natural power to dispel lies, so it's natural that those who lie have it in their interest to prevent truth from being spoken. It takes courage in times like these to stand up, as it takes a willingness to face criticism and attacks. But I also understand that taking up this mantle during this time is what myself and others are being asked to do, and I'll do everything I can to not let you down, and to do so calmly and with good reason. Now, I'm a big believer in finding opportunities in adversity. When one door closes, another opens, and I have faith that for those who stand with integrity, goodness will always prevail. The Epoch Times has been publishing for over 20 years, despite the Chinese Communist Party's best efforts to shut us down. They've gone after our funding sources, they've hacked our website, they've set our printers on fire, they've threatened our staff, and used every means they could to discredit us. And despite the world's second largest economy bearing down on us, we've never stopped publishing, and we never plan to do so. Now, you may be wondering how we've managed to survive all these years. Put simply, we've managed to survive because of you, because of loyal viewers and readers who support independent media. So thank you, genuinely. We couldn't have done it without you. And with that said, given that YouTube has demonetized us, if you want to support us, please consider donating to us on DonorBox, which you can find linked in the description below. And going forward, I plan to continue presenting an accurate picture of the news, including here in the United States. I also plan to continue my work exposing the subversive programs of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think will only become more serious. And I plan also to help expose the forms that socialism is now taking in this country and around the world, while also helping to keep alive the values and traditions that are now under assault. That said, folks, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support. And while it's possible we may move to another platform, these current attacks will not stop us from speaking the truth. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.